is the purpose of difficulty in games? This is something that I think isn't really discussed often. I feel like people have this take of difficulty is subjective, and some things are harder for some people and other things are harder for other people. I think the purpose of difficulty primarily is to give players, especially players who master a game, some different options to play different things, like to do different things in the game. So for example, if you master the game, having a higher difficulty allows you to extract more enjoyment from the game, basically, or it gives you some option to do something. Whereas if there weren't a higher difficulty, you'd have to, do what most people end up doing, which is self-imposed challenges. So this save file is from my second Divorced and Homeless run, and what that was it was a ringless, no somniel run where I wasn't allowed to get passives, I wasn't allowed to get rings, I wasn't allowed to use rings, I wasn't allowed to use anything in the somniel, like forging, meals, arena, literally nothing in either of those things, as well as, no DLC and things like this. And this ended up being one of the hardest runs I've ever done, like period, across all the Fire Emblem runs I've done, including like Chat Sabotage, Skip Only 3 Houses, and a few other things. And the purpose of difficulty for a high difficulty is really to challenge the player fundamentally. I think that is its function. So when you have a bunch of options for difficulty in a game, the highest one at the very least should always be hard no matter what, even if you're good at the game. Ideally, it should still be hard if you're good at the game. And a lot of people, once they master most of these games through min-maxing, they are able to breeze through the games and have very little to do with those games afterwards. Now, Engage happens to be a game that's great for challenge runs, which is why I think a lot of people still play it. Some people really like 3 Houses and do challenge runs in that. Personally, I don't think 3 Houses is as enjoyable just because of the amount of grinding you have to do just to get like class masteries and things like this. But the actual difficulty in these games is usually related to stats and numbers and character builds instead of player choices and strong moves. So when you make good moves in these games, it does matter to some degree, but having strong units and just sending them in is usually better. So if I had like a broken build, for example, if I had 3 broken builds right now, I could just send them in and just go fight these things. I wouldn't have to worry about getting one-rounded. I wouldn't have to worry about positioning well or not because the broken builds would carry me. And essentially, I could just get away with doing whatever I wanted. And that typically is what happens in these games. Even 3 Houses, like from my experience in 3 Houses and in Engage, if I'm playing the game without restrictions, like in a normal maddening run in either, it's super easy to min-max the game so that your characters and builds are so broken that the game basically plays itself and you don't really need to think about anything. So I think part of the issue with these games is that the requirement of the player, like the requirements of the player to make good moves, are very low for strategy games. And if you play a game like chess or shogi, or play games like chess or shogi, the whole game is just making good moves. Like those are the mechanics. You just make good moves, and if you make bad moves, you're worse off and you lose. Now it is true, if you make bad moves in Fire Emblem, you're worse off and you lose. But not necessarily lose. You're worse off, right? Like you do better if you make good moves. So making good moves is always preferable to not making good moves. But the requirement to make good moves to win is just not present. Like, you are not required to find certain solutions to certain positional problems like you would be in chess and to respond to what your opponent's doing. Typically what you have to do is set up kills and be safe. And as long as you set up kills properly and you don't position your units where they die after you set up kills, you can continue to make progress and you will be fine. And there are also tools people typically use in these games to kind of bypass the need for positioning, which is kind of sad that these are even in the game, to be honest, because so what am I referring to? Canter and Kanto. So the thing with Canter and Kanto, basically the way this game is typically designed for maps is you have groups of enemies that push you or that you need to attack, and typically those enemies have other groups of enemies, Like in this case, these are far away, but usually in most maps, the other groups of enemies are barely overlapping, so that if you attack this and leave a dude here, he is vulnerable to other things. So let's say like just Louis was up here, none of these other units were up here, and I were to attack this and kill this, and then there were 4 enemies remaining and he would die. That would be an example of bad positioning because I've overextended him into enemy territory, and he is now under too much pressure and cannot tank all of these things and will die. So that is typically how like chess is played, where like if you bring your queen out and you don't know what you're doing with your queen and you just want to start attacking, the enemies can kind of harass you. Like weaker pieces can harass the queen, so even though it's the best piece, it can still be attacked. So like in this game, you could send in your best piece and there will be things to harass that, and if it doesn't have a broken build that can infinitely tank things or tank like an absurd amount of things, which is true of most broken builds, you actually have to consider where you're at, right? So Canter allows you to get in, attack something, and then get out, which reduces the positional calculation on the player. And Canto is very bad because it allows you to move like 4 tiles in, kill something, and then move 4 tiles out. And the probability that being 4 tiles away from the enemy like has you in danger still is like near 0. Like getting in and out 4 tiles, or like getting in 3 tiles and getting out 5 tiles, or however much movement the unit has, you're basically guaranteed to get out. Like some people are so reliant on Canter and Engage that they literally can't play without it because they don't know how to position without it. It's a literal skill issue. Now, can you use Canter? Sure. Like, I'm not saying you can't use Canter or you're like a casual if you use Canter or something stupid like that. I'm just saying that the people who rely on Canter literally can't play without it because they don't know how to position without having the constant get out of jail free card. And it really is a get out of jail free card because very often you can, the 2, like even just basic Canter, the 2 tiles is usually enough to get to safety in like 90% of situations. So like you get in, you get to attack and kill something, then you get to get out. And part of the problem with a lot of these strategy games, they're called SRPGs, and I would argue most of them are typically RPGs with strategy elements. And I'm not saying that to be like, I don't know, like elitist or annoying or like, oh, this is not like chess, therefore it's an RPG. It's like, no, like you can min-max the characters so much to the point where they just do too much and they reduce the strategy requirement of using them to near 0, where it's like, if I make a broken Ike tank or a broken Erica tank or Roy tank or use bonded shield or whatever and just send it in, it just beats the game super quickly and I don't even have to do anything. Now, if you severely limit yourself in some way through like a draft run or you ban emblems or whatever, now all of a sudden you have to start using different mechanics. And even if you ban emblems, like if you allow like engravings, even just allowing engravings can enable you to become an avoid tank. And that just makes it so that you can stand next to like 10 enemies and attack them all and kill them all, as long as they don't have like chain attack spam on you. But even just passives plus emblems is enough to break the game. So like, I feel like these games, they can be really fun, and I do like them. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these games suck because they're not like chess or something stupid like that. I think they are overall really good. I think Engage is one of the better strategy games out right now for like gameplay. But the tactical and strategy elements in these games is typically toned down in favor of the RPG elements. And you could argue that most people like these games for the RPG elements, and the strategy is kind of like second to those things. So most people might play for the dating sim aspect, or like in Three Houses, everyone loves like high school for some reason. I think there's like a lot of like built up angst and repressive memories or something, where people want to go back to that time, like before they were adults and had jobs and everything. Maybe it has some, I feel like there's something at play there. So like, I think that's part of the reason why Three Houses did so well. It also took itself more seriously and had a more serious tone than Engage, but Engage still was a commercial success. But I know like a lot of people like that aspect of these games, like the support conversations, the story, they like the RPG elements, and I think that if they were to break this game down and make these games more tactical and less like RPG, like more like if it was like 80% strategy and 20% RPG, it would probably be a completely different crowd that plays them. And it's possible that like most people play these games for the RPG elements, and then the strategy has always just kind of been this like secondary thing. Because I do feel like a lot of the player base for these games is mostly interested in like the story and the characters and the RPG elements and the leveling up and the builds, more so than like making strong moves and understanding like tactics. So for example, if I wanted to start setting up like some kind of attack or something on these dudes in the middle, I could start with like a chain attack, right? Like maybe switch, alright, he has 0 damage. He has 0 damage. Switch to like this, maybe procs a Luna. I think he's like under leveled. We haven't been using him in this run. But like you would set up like chain attack, and then Anna could set up a chain attack. Maybe she goes for like an axe attack. Let's see what kind of damage she can deal. So she could go for that if it didn't kill her. We can go for this. That will move him though. But you could start like actually figuring out like what moves you want to do. In this opening move, I could have changed it so that Tamara went for this instead. She could also go for a Brave Lance proc potentially. All right, so she didn't proc. So a lot of this, like this team relies on like crits, sandstorms, and randomness to some degree, because this is a run where you have like almost no resources, right? So in order to beat these maps, the whole premise of this run is that you can only make strong moves. That's basically the idea, right? You can give them new weapons, and you can use a master seal and then second seal them to reset their level, but not class change. And it basically forces you, it removes a lot of the like RPG elements and just pushes the strategy in the forefront, and completely forces you to just get good at like positioning and making strong moves and calculating out attacks and things like this. And if you can't calculate out attacks in this run, you will not be very successful at all. So honestly, I feel like the Divorced and Homeless rule set kind of shows us what Fire Emblem would look like if it was like an 80 to 90% strategy game and a 10 to 20% RPG. And I kind of really like it. And that's basically what I'm going for the indie game I'm working on, is that I want it to be like 80% strategy, 20% RPG. So it has enough RPG in it where like you can switch weapons, and then the weapons will do different things. So like it won't be like Steel Sword is just worse than Silver Sword, so just use a Silver Sword. It'll be like Ice Katana, Fire Katana. The Fire Katana applies a burn effect. The Ice Katana reduces enemy movement. Like, so it wouldn't be better or worse. It would be like one does one thing, the other does another thing. And I feel like in this run, that actually was something that was kind of present. So like Longbow versus Radiant Bow. Like Radiant Bow can punch through armor. It has better might. It can one-shot most flyers. It's magical damage. And Longbow is great for chain attacks, and it's good against things that have high res if you're shooting something with higher res. So Anna could double on that, or she could switch to Silver Bow. So there's like trade-offs between all these weapons, right? Like Longbow has 3 range. 3 range, you could counterattack Thorons and double them. That's huge value, whereas these can't. This is generally better for just like physical poke than Longbow if I need physical poke. Obviously, she's not being weighed down by either, or if she is, hold on, is she being weighed down? Wow. Her build is that high? Wow, dude, Anna's so good, what the hell? Her build is high enough to weightlessly use Silver and Longbow. Now, she is high level, but then you also have Silver Great Axe for like super whacking enemies, especially broken enemies. And there's a bunch of different reasons to use different weapons. Even like Chloe here. She has Brionac for 1 to 2 range physical pokes. She can kind of double on it. I can switch her to a lighter weapon if I need to double a fast enemy. She can also super whack with Silver Great Lance. She can poke out armors with Flame Lance and double them for decent damage. Hort has Elwyn to 1 round Wyverns. She has El Thunder to 3 range poke. She has El Fire for general use. She also can double a little bit better on Elwyn because El Fire weighs her down by 1. And then Tamara, she can Brave Lance. There was a specific play where Tamara procced like 3 sandstorms on a worm on chapter 23, and if that didn't happen, I wouldn't have beaten that chapter. This run has been crazy as hell, dude. This run is like, if you push everything to the extremes and just make this like a hardcore strategy game. And it's honestly kind of sick. It's super difficult and almost frustrating. It's like anything that's really difficult can be frustrating at times, especially if it's harder than what you're used to. But it's actually really fun. And part of the reason why I'm making this video is because I feel like a lot of modern strategy games are mostly RPGs with strategy elements. And some are more strategy than RPG, obviously. Like some games are like 60% strategy, 40% RPG, and that's just the percentage of like what's required to win, right? So like if a game leans heavy into the min-maxing, like I would say Unicorn Overlord is like 95% min-maxing builds RPG and then 5% strategy. Because like the strategies you use in Unicorn Overlord are very minimalistic. Like you basically just have to send your units in to attack things. And then just make sure they don't step on like a bear trap and get stuck for like 5 seconds or whatever. That's really it. Like once you have the broken builds, you can do whatever you want and it will work. Whereas with this game, especially with this challenge set, you can't really mess around. Like you have to actually know what you're doing. So in this particular run, I consider it soft locked because I let too many good units die and I had to sub in these like low level randos, like Axe Armor Jade, level 10 Alchrist. Now Alchrist is good in this run, but level 10 Alchrist on the final map without any emblems or passives or forges, no one at level 10 is going to be good here. So this run I made too many mistakes. I wasted warp staff. It's soft locked, and I think that's actually fine. If you're playing something on the highest difficulty, it should actually be really hard. And it's fine if it's really hard, because a high difficulty is supposed to be demanding and force the player to adapt and overcome a challenge. That's the entire purpose of a high difficulty. If the high difficulty can be cheesed through gimmick builds, why even have the high difficulty? Like if there are ways to make it super easy that completely break it, and they're never going to be patched or addressed, like it's really up to the player. Like that's one thing that's weird. It's like it feels weird when I'm the developer and I'm not the developer. Like I actually am working on a strategy game right now, and I actually have to put in like time and energy and like think about what like how things are gonna work and what I'm gonna do with things. And it's weird when it's my job now to balance somebody else's game for them when they're like a AAA company that has industry veterans who all have more experience than me and anyone who doesn't even work on games, it's just a player, and then they don't balance their high difficulty in a way that's interesting or compelling, and it's just like up to the player to like remove or add mechanics or mod the game in some cases for like PC games and stuff to make these games like good. And it's weird. Like I feel like it's not too much to ask for, really, for a game made by a AAA company that consistently profits off of their releases to support the higher difficulties a little bit better and to playtest their games a little bit better, and to maybe balance some of the overpowered things so you can't just immediately cheese the game. Now I understand why they like to have things like warp in the game, and like Micaiah warp. I think it's weird. I don't like it. I don't like that you can just teleport to a boss and just kill it. I feel like that completely defeats the purpose of, like, imagine if I was playing chess with someone and they had like some cheat code enabled that just allowed them to instantly beat me before I could make a move. It's like, that's not the point of playing chess. The point of playing chess is to make moves on the board and to evaluate positions and to actually try to squeeze out a positional advantage using material and moves and so on. So like when you completely bypass that aspect of the game, which is arguably its core gameplay loop, to just completely beat a thing before anything even happens, is that even truly playing the game? I would argue it's not. Now we're getting more philosophical, like what is the spirit of the game, insofar as like what are we doing when playing these games and how are these games being played? But arguably something that just allows you to completely bypass, like if it was a puzzle game, which it is, and instead of having to solve the puzzle, you can just hit a button and just like teleport over the puzzle. That's stupid. So that's like the thing in Angry Birds, the eagle, where like the whole point of Angry Birds is to like knock down things. And then there's like this cheat code you can pay like $2 for called the Eagle that just immediately destroys everything and clears maps for you. That's basically what warp skipping is. That's how I view warp skipping. I think it's like this weird thing that's almost like akin to like a cheat code. And I don't think it's like healthy for the game either. I feel like these games should be like more positional, and I think their higher difficulties should require like more execution from the player instead of game knowledge. I'll talk about execution and game knowledge in a separate video, but I think that's it for this one. Thank you for checking this out. I'll see you next one. Peace.